background. So I've worked in the tech industry for about 25 years and sort of pivoted into the HR sort of space about 2 years ago, and have been pretty heavily focused around looking at skills, workforce, how do we build and grow the skills that we need, and with a particular focus on cybersecurity. So today we're going to go through what I've called From Skills to Cyber Shields, fortifying the human firewall across the life cycle with SFIA. And what we'll go through is some of the workforce challenges that we see around cyber. I have a bit of an opinion on this one. I sort of struggle answering people when they ask me how long have I worked in cyber. It's just something that we've always done. Sort of see it as an extension of technology more broadly, but there are nuances, and we'll go through some of that during this session. We'll go through how SFIA can be used as a strategic enabler for cyber workforce, how we look at embedding it across the lifecycle, different frameworks, not just SFIA, but other frameworks that complement building that workforce. We'll go through a specialist versus generalist concept. We did sort of touch on that for those that went to the sessions yesterday where we looked at DigComp. We'll also look at some of the non-technical and professional skills elements and how we also start thinking about preparing for the future. I think we've been through a lot of disruption in this space over the last couple of years, but I think we're in for a hell of a lot more, so stay tuned. And if you do have any questions, I am quite neurodivergent and good at multitasking, so feel free to drop them in the chat at any time. But as a sort of scene setting piece, a lot of what I'm going to be talking through has actually came out of work that I've done on behalf of the Executive Cyber Council. So the Executive Cyber Council is a group of government and industry people coming together to execute on the 2023 to 2030 Australian Cybersecurity Strategy. So for those that haven't seen that before, it was basically our first national cyber strategy. It was broken down into 6 shields, and Shield 5 was focused on sovereign capabilities. And under sovereign capabilities, that's where we start looking at things like workforce. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, any one of those shields, any one of those initiatives that need to be driven out of that strategy, they all need people. So what we've actually found is that quite a lot of the stuff that we've looked at is actually impacting a lot of those areas. So under the Executive Cyber Council, we established 4 working groups: small medium business, sovereign capabilities, emerging technologies, and cyber workforce. So I was part of cyber workforce. That's co-chaired by CyberCX and Woolworths, or Countdown for those in New Zealand. And we basically looked at the 4 problem statements down and bottom. So what we're looking for is, how do we have a high quality education and training opportunities that support defined pathways into the cybersecurity profession, a professionalized workforce with clear standards to validate skills and experience, world-class cyber workforce that welcomes people from a wide range of backgrounds, and an inclusive cyber workforce with career opportunities for diverse cohorts, particularly women who are significantly underrepresented. So breaking that down a little bit, we want to know that training actually leads to job opportunities. Training is fit for purpose, reflects the realities of the real world. We want to know what pathways there are in cyber. I talk to a lot of students. They say they want to get a job in cybersecurity. I ask them what job, and they look at me with blank faces and haven't really thought about the fact that there are about 100 different jobs in cybersecurity, and it really does take all different brain types, all different skill sets. So when we think about it from that perspective, something like SFIA as a digital skills framework is a perfect solution. At the same time, we know that we have a significant underrepresentation of diverse groups, notably women, who make up 17% of the sector in Australia. I don't particularly like the 17% number because that doesn't really reflect the different specialisms within cyber. So when we look at a penetration tester, for example. There's a lot less women in that trade than there are in another trade such as security operations. So while we build and grow a workforce, supply the skills that we need for the country, we also wanted to make it as inclusive as possible. So that some of the things that we looked at, we did a lot of research, a big literature review. We went out and consulted with a large number of organisations across Australia. We also consulted with some international groups as well. One thing that we wanted to do was not reinvent the wheel, so we were trying to harmonise the approach. Then earlier in the year, in February, we actually ran what we called the Cyber Workforce Summit in Sydney, Australia. Brought together 118 different minds, not just the ECC members, but we went a lot broader than that. And what we were really trying to do is figure out, what don't we know? What haven't we seen? What are the good initiatives out there? So the intent of that was to run some roundtables and fill in any gaps on interesting things that are happening that we want to amplify and scale. And so where we're at today, we have brought all of this work together in what I've called the Australian Cyber Workforce Playbook. That is actually just been approved by the Cybersecurity Minister to be released, and that will be coming very soon via the Australian Government's Department of Home Affairs website. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is the insights that we gathered during that discovery process. And if you do feel like a lot of reading, there's 250 pages of playbook coming very soon. I'm told it pairs very nicely with a Pinot and some cheese. So the Cyber Workforce Challenge, I'm going to be looking at two things when I think about the Cyber Workforce Challenge. I'm going to be looking at the actual workforce itself, but then also the environment that we're operating in and how that's changing. And that is, I guess, to my point earlier about cyber being a little bit more nuanced. That'll be captured on that next slide. But a lot of these workforce challenges, very common. We know about a talent shortage and skills gaps. And one thing I want to call out here is the elephant in the room, which is we actually do have a very large pipeline of talent coming out of higher education, out of schools, out of the vocational education and training sector here in Australia. And a lot of them are actually really struggling to find work. So the people are there. It's not that we don't have the people, it's just that the skill sets that we're looking for are not necessarily the skill sets they have. There's a common narrative around needing 30,000 people, 50,000 people, depends on which report you look at. But the reality is a lot of the jobs are actually just not out there for entry-level people coming straight out of the school system or higher education. And so where we do actually see the demand is in those more advanced roles. So very specialized roles, sort of without asking for a specific number of years as a requirement. It is sort of assumed for some of these roles that we actually see the demand for that you do have some experience on the tools, you have worked across a few different environments. So that all sort of creates this real supply and demand challenge for Australia. And not too dissimilar, we did actually break down the 8 sort of highest in demand areas, and we did cross-reference that with some global research from different organizations, and we all landed at pretty much the same place. At the same time, there's new emerging technologies that are coming out. I'm sure you have all heard of AI and the risks associated with AI. That needs upskilling and reskilling of the current workforce. There's also a lot of opportunity coming around quantum and a lot of risks coming around quantum as well. Although some of these areas are captured in frameworks like SFIA, we really don't know what those roles and what those skills and specifically the application of those skills actually look like going forward. Retention and continuous growth. So we see a lot of churn in cybersecurity. The average tenure for a SOC analyst, for example, is 1 year and 6 months. A lot of because of the supply-demand challenge, we do see a lot of poaching, especially for junior workers, where they can jump jobs and make a significant pay increase, whereas if they hang around, it's unlikely to come anytime soon. We see a lot of churn, and that's not good for the industry because it's artificially inflating some of those wages. In my opinion, key to retention is having well-defined pathways. You need to have visible career progression. You need to have learning opportunities. One of the trends that I've seen across the industry is, despite there being hard data, estimates are around 30% of the cost of somebody's salary to replace. Sorry, the estimate is you would spend 30% of somebody's annual salary to replace them. That also doesn't take into fact the knowledge that's walking out the door, their understanding of your ways of working. Even though all of that data is out there, organizations will still lose their staff and hire new staff, potentially at a higher salary, rather than actually investing into learning and growth. So it's a big problem. Various reasons for that, which I'll cover in a little bit later. But the other thing with retention and continuous growth is we're also not really doing enough to improve diversity and inclusion within the workforce. And so we see a lot of amazing talent coming in. We don't have the right environment for them. They end up leaving. And the whole business case, I hate the word business case, but the business case behind diversity and inclusion is that is how we drive innovation. It's how we build resilience. It's how we introduce creative thinking. If we don't have a diverse workforce that reflects the communities that we're securing, we miss out on all of those opportunities. We also have a rapidly evolving landscape. So a few dimensions, won't gloss over that because it's on the next slide, but the change in cyber threats, what our adversaries are doing, regulations, technologies, all of this is creating workforce challenges because it needs that structured ongoing learning and upskilling. Touched on lack of formal careers and pathways. I'll expand on that a little bit further now. We're not just looking at the actual cyber specialists here, we're also now starting to think about internal mobility. So if you have somebody with transferable skill sets, I love using the case study of veterans. Veterans have a mission mindset, good leadership skills, great at running operations. How does that translate as a career pathway? So when we talk about career pathways, it really is kind of the analogy is it's like a metro map where there's multiple rail lines. You can get off at any station and pivot in multiple directions. We also have workforce resource constraints. The data is showing that, and it's worse in some jurisdictions. So in America, for example, headcounts are decreasing. We need to do more, but we're getting less headcount to do it. So efficiency and prioritization of skill development to be able to satisfy those needs in a budget constrained environment is absolutely critical. And then the other workforce challenge is the silos and misalignment. So cyber is quite often a little team that sits out on its own, doesn't necessarily collaborate with IT. There's potential to start spreading some of those cyber skills across those IT areas, as well as other parts of the business. I kind of liken it to how IT used to be treated 25 years ago. It was a cost center. We didn't really want to invest much into it. As a result, it became siloed. It wasn't really until much later that it started being viewed as a business enabler, as a strategic tool, and security or cybersecurity is pretty much the same. It's often the least resourced, the budget's never enough, and we're not really viewing it as an actual function to keep the business running. Moving outside the organization now, the macro operating environment complexity. So this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing. So adversaries, and this is mainly focused around AI, and expanding attack surface and just general governance challenges. But AI-enabled adversaries, so a lot of attacks used to be a person on a keyboard on the other end of the line. It's all automated now. AI is accelerating a lot of the campaigns that we're seeing. So phishing campaigns, malware generation, discovering vulnerabilities. It's not a human anymore. It's all being done by AI. For the broader workforce that might not be as cyber literate, they're being impacted significantly more by deepfakes and synthetic media. So there's a lot of impersonation, a lot of fraud, a lot of disinformation campaigns happening. We've also got adaptive threats. So like I mentioned, there's not necessarily somebody on a keyboard. You've actually got AI in your environment. It's able to learn, evolve tactics in real time, and it bypasses traditional defenses because it just looks like a human. The typical things that we used to look for in a security operations center don't get triggered. We don't get the alerts. So it's a lot harder to see that sort of activity occurring. We also have weaponized larger language models. So threat actors are using large language models to craft convincing scams, social engineering scripts, even code exploits. You used to have to actually write, or adversaries would write their own code. Now it's all just done by AI. The expanding attack surface, every new system, every new device, every new service, it's increasing that attack surface. It's introducing technical debt and introducing potential vulnerabilities. The challenge as well, and I was actually talking to somebody about this the other day in federal government, the challenge is we're in this interesting position where we need to maintain a lot of older equipment, excuse me, a lot of older infrastructure, and we're running that in parallel. So on one hand, we're using AI, we're starting to embrace all these new technologies, but then in many environments, particularly in government and defense, you've still got a lot of legacy systems in there, and maintaining both, keeping both secure, and actually having the skill sets within the organization to understand and do both is incredibly challenging. A lot of IoT and OT convergence as well. So anything that plugs in is pretty much connected to the internet these days. You think about at a consumer level, how many devices you have at home which are connected to the internet. This is incredibly challenging. One of my sort of side hobbies is radio frequency or RF system engineering. It's just an extension of a network, just like a lot of these IoT and OT systems in industry. These are all just extensions of the network. Quite often security is an afterthought. They're not secure by design like most IT systems. That is creating significant challenges because they get popped pretty easily. Once an adversary is inside, they can move laterally, and you don't necessarily have this secure perimeter around your corporate IT. Remote work and cloud adoption, sort of two parts to that. A lot of people are still remote working. They're working from home. Their networks at home don't have the same sort of security that your corporate networks do. And then on the cloud side, we are seeing a lot more utilization of software as a service or just general infrastructure as a service platforms. It's quite difficult for IT departments to track a lot of these SaaS applications, especially where the funding or people can just credit card a service. You don't necessarily know what data is going in and out. At the top end of town, large organizations that have the budgets for tooling, there is tooling out there that can stay on top of this stuff, but it's beyond reach for most organizations. So we need to have skilled people that are actually able to go out and look for this kind of thing. There's also sectoral exposure. So certain sectors are more vulnerable or are targeted more frequently. You think about healthcare, finance, education, not-for-profits. They're increasingly being targeted due to the data sensitivity, and quite often they're under-resourced as well. One thing I'd point out with that as well is when you think about the initial access vectors for a lot of the adversaries, they're quite often targeting the humans. You can have the best IT infrastructure, you can have the best security tools, But a lot of the breaches that we see actually start by somebody social engineering somebody. And quite often it's in those sorts of organizations. So they get socially engineered. Somehow, whatever happens, people get on the network and it's all downhill from there. And then the accessibility piece is probably the biggest thing I think that's driving a lot of the challenge for us. It's you can spin up AI solutions, you can spin up cloud infrastructure. You don't have to make big investments. There's freely accessible training in how to do a lot of these things. The barrier is pretty low for adversaries. Low-skilled criminals are empowered with high-end capabilities like we've never seen before. On the bottom there, the governance challenges, regulation, it's very hard to keep up. There's a lot of regulatory changes coming. With something like AI, we're actually lagging a little bit behind, for example, the European Union. However, one could argue that the European Union has actually overregulated. So we need to stay on top of it. It's changing all the time. Within Australia, there have been quite a few significant legislation changes over the last couple of years. It's not just a matter of changing a process. Quite often systems need to be adjusted as well. This is all very complex, very time consuming, needs planning, needs change management. The lack of strategy. I literally made a comment about this on LinkedIn today. A lot of organizations are just running before they're planning and going out credit carding AI solutions, implementing AI solutions without with a lack of strategy in place. You need to have a formal strategy and supporting policies and processes. As an example, there was an organization who implemented an AI-based solution. They thought they were being smart because it was air-gapped. It was a local instance for their own organization. So it may have been protected from the outside and from data leaking outside the organization, but they hadn't actually considered how people would be using it inside. It's quite often the trusted insiders. And so an employee decided to ask, how much am I getting paid? And what are other people getting paid? How is my pay relative to other people's pay? That is pretty sensitive data where before AI, it would have been in a lockdown folder. There would have been permissions on it. You just wouldn't be able to access it. But now organizations have run out, implemented these solutions, not really thought about how they can be exploited, and that creates problems. There's also significant expectations. So expectations from board members, executives, consumers, suppliers, other parts of the business. They expect cybersecurity teams to just be covering everything, and they don't often understand how difficult it is, in how much time it takes, the resourcing it takes, the budget it takes, and I always drop the cliche line of we need to get it right all the time. Our adversaries need to get it right just once. So those expectations are quite problematic. The final one there is ethics. So the regulation may be behind in certain areas, or technology may be dual purpose as well. It's still important for us to train people and make sure that they have skills and how to make ethical decisions. Sometimes you may make a decision in implementing a technology solution, acting with the best intent and good faith. However, you may not know the potential ramifications down the track. So that's all of these things cumulatively are creating quite a few challenges for us. So I'll just pause for a second there because I noticed a few questions coming through. Yeah, so Tristan Richards, great question. I think this is a jigsaw puzzle problem. So how do we create capacity to bring more talent in? Well, we need to train those people who are currently in those junior roles into those niche roles. The challenge with that is availability of courses and appetite for organizations to actually grow those people within the organization. So the other thing that's challenging is some of these things just take time. And I don't mean time in terms of years on the job. I mean exposure and experience. So a lot of organizations won't have access to infrastructure to test some of these skills and build some of these skills in a safe environment. Okay, cracking on. So this was kind of my big picture view of what good looks like. So here is a strategic opportunity, and SFIA is powering a lot of this. So we need to start thinking more about role design and mapping skills. At the moment, it's very agnostic, ad hoc. We need to start creating that common language. The skills that we're building need to be driven by data. So quite often I have requests from people to go off and do courses. I ask about how is that course going to support our business outcomes. A lot of it's just basket weaving. It doesn't actually translate to real capability. So we need to have a data-driven workforce strategy. We need to have inclusive policies, particularly when we start thinking about people moving up. One of the questions I always ask to sort of keep people accountable is, did the person you're looking to move up or move sideways have the same opportunities? Did they get exposure to the projects? Did they get access to training? Simple things like that. We also want integrated governance and operating models to break down any silos. So before, when I was talking about cyber sitting out on its lonely side, we need to bring those people in, and at the same time, they get an appreciation of what the business is doing, what the business needs, how they can best support the business outcomes, and vice versa, the rest of the business can actually start building awareness, upskilling, raising that baseline cyber literacy. We need to have a compelling employee value proposition and pathways to be able to boost engagement and retention. So what that looks like, we need to have continuous learning, we need to have training opportunities, we need time and space to actually do the learning. One thing that I've noticed, particularly within Australia, is that a lot of organizations don't actually invest a lot in research and development. They don't have time for innovation. When I compare that to tech companies in the US, for example, Google, they're sort of famous for that 20% of time goes towards innovation or learning. That is how Gmail came about. It basically was a side hustle pet project of somebody, and here we are today. So we don't really give people space, particularly in the private sector and especially in consulting land where your time is billable. We need to create those opportunities for people to grow. We also need blended learning strategies. So there is the formal learning, there are courses, but cyber is a lot more than just courses, particularly if you're on the defensive side or on the offensive side. Those techniques, those tactics and techniques and procedures, they change all the time. By the time it's written down, by the time it's in a course, it's out of date. So we need opportunities for people to go off and do hands-on learning. We need opportunities for people to go out and do networking, go to conferences and things like that. The optimized L&D investment. So how do we measure the effectiveness of any spend on L&D? What constitutes L&D? This is a fundamental question that not a lot of organizations have actually considered and documented, and there's very traditional views. I sometimes laugh when I see an organization advertising on Seek or LinkedIn a job opportunity, and they say, as part of their employee value proposition, hey, we'll give you $5,000 worth of training. And I think about $5,000 worth of training, and then I think about a SANS course which costs $15,000. It means I can't even do one SANS course, and is that all the training I'm getting for the whole year? So we need to optimize learning, and we need to get out of that course mentality. And then the final point is workforce assurance. Just because somebody's certified, just because somebody's done a course, has that actually resulted in a change of behavior? How are we actually measuring that? both internally and independently through third parties. Now, all sounds great, lovely opportunities, but there are barriers. So lack of time. A lot of people don't have time. You've got two sides to that. You've got, in a lot of organizations, you've got centralized HR functions. They're often the first to lose staff when there's cost optimization. They haven't got the time. Then you've got people leaders and managers within the actual tech area. They also don't have the time. So a lot of these workforce initiatives, it's quite personal, it's quite tailored. Things like career management, you need to sit down with people one-on-one and really plan stuff out. It takes time and we just don't have the time. The capability piece, I've noticed a lot of people, because of the supply and demand challenge, got promoted very quickly in tech. And as a result, they've never really developed, nobody's ever really sat them down and actually walked through, this is how we manage careers, this is how you grow your people. HR teams can help to a point, but at some point, you need to start getting into the fine details. You need to start getting into the technical stuff. And a lot of people just haven't been taught that skill, so they lack the capability. The lack of awareness of workforce best practices. Again, this is one of those things where a lot of it's just traditional operating models. So tech person, neurodivergent, sitting in a job interview, they really hate job interviews. Why are we still using that as a technique? What is a better option for finding the best talent? Can we do a skills assessment? Can we do a coding challenge, something like that? Budget, I'm going to talk about budget, just that there's not enough of it. Prioritization, when there are so many other things, we need to meet regulatory requirements. There's pressure to automate, pressure to find efficiencies. Workforce development often is the last thing that we think about. So something that a lot of organizations need to prioritize a little bit more. And then the final one there is solution scalability. So a lot of these things are quite tailored to the individual, quite tailored to the team. Can't just do a one size fits all. And that creates that challenge of scalability. So good opportunities, a couple of barriers to overcome, nothing entirely insurmountable. So this is SFIA week, so we're going to talk about SFIA, and this is an adaptation of Grant's image, but basically we need to consider SFIA across the entire workforce lifecycle. Quite often we think about it during hiring, we think about it during performance reviews, and that's pretty much it. It needs to be considered across the entire life cycle. So if you have resources that are on the bench, resources that are not working on a project, where can they be redeployed to? If we're going to redeploy them, what skills have they got? SFIA is that taxonomy of skills. How do we assess the skills? What skills are we even assessing? Again, SFIA is your answer to that. There's all these different aspects, and quite often we're only touching one or two. So whenever we talk about skills, whenever we talk about workforce, SFIA should be part of that conversation. So as an example, what makes up a workforce strategy? So key tool for HR, we need to do an organizational needs and job analysis. We need to do job architecture development. We need to do learning and development strategy. We need to define career pathways and internal mobility. And all of this is actually aligned with the business's or the organization's mission, the strategy, its goals. SFIA is the language that can be universally used across each one of those elements of workforce strategy. I've got an interesting image here of a job architecture. So job architecture has job families, job levels, job titles, job descriptions, skills, compensation structure, and career paths. How do we define that? Common language would be great. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to do it from scratch. What can help us with that? SFIA. On the other side of it, though, and this is the interesting bit that a lot of organizations probably haven't looked at yet, is how do we actually define the capabilities that we need? And we have SFIA as a skills framework, but from a capability framework point of view, what can we use? And that introduces this next slide, where I've brought in the NIST cybersecurity framework. So NIST cybersecurity framework basically spells out across 5 dimensions: protect, detect, respond, recover, and identify. Across those 5 dimensions, what are all the capabilities? What are all the things that we need to do to provide end-to-end cyber coverage? Interestingly, on the SFIA website, there is actually a mapping of NIST CSF capabilities to SFIA. So when you have the capability, the next step from that is, what skills do we need to support that capability? What do our people need to be able to know to be able to do the thing? On the SFIA website, there is actually a mapping of NIST CSF to SFIA. However, it is the old version of SFIA and the older version of NIST CSF. So one of the things I'm working on currently is updating that mapping to the latest version of both those frameworks. There's other complementary frameworks as well. So for example, the cyber body of knowledge. So when we talk about knowledge, what is the underpinning theory that relates to those skills? Again, we don't need to go off and build wikis in our organizations. We've got all that information there already. NIST, again, another role-based skills framework. If that's the language your organization uses, that's cool. You don't need to pick SFIA necessarily. There are other frameworks out there. You may have other frameworks in other parts of the business as well. You can use any of these frameworks. The trick is bringing them all together, and there is actually mapping across a lot of these. Once you've landed on your frameworks, we then start thinking about the foundation, or that is the foundation rather. We then start thinking about integration. How do we embed those frameworks across that whole workforce lifecycle? How do we tailor it for specific contexts? And with frameworks and with skills, with all of this workforce planning stuff, it's not a do it once and that's it. We need to be constantly thinking about the future. AI disruption was the one that really sort of triggered a lot of these thought processes in organizations, where we're now starting to talk about skills portability. How do we redeploy people? How do we change their skills? How do the levels of responsibility of the skills that they currently have, how does that all impact it? So this is the simple version. This is the very complicated version. So this is where I've actually gone in and I've mapped the organization context on the left. So the organizational strategy, people, process, technologies. That's what we need to do to be able to execute on that strategy. There are some governance considerations. There are some assurance considerations. But on the right-hand side, you can see SFIA. So that's how SFIA translates across to each of these areas. Cybox in there as our knowledge reference point, and we've got NIST cybersecurity framework to actually define the capabilities that we need. And I've just thrown in NIST to demonstrate the fact that it does actually translate. How does it look in practice? I know I was just talking about NIST CSF. However, within Australia, within the Australian government, the Information Security Manual, so that is our cybersecurity framework for Australian government. We can use that, which basically articulates the capabilities that we need to provide, the different controls that we need to have in place, and reverse engineering that, we can actually identify what are the key things we need to do, what are the likely roles that come out of that, and then against each of those roles, what are the SFIA skills and at what level will we be applying those skills? So just as an illustrative example, this is what it looks like in practice. Cyber specialist versus generalist. So this was also touched on in the session yesterday, but we, like I said, are going to need to do more with less. We can't keep hiring more people, and some of these people just don't exist. So we need to start pushing skills left. And what I mean by that is we need to start considering how can we take somebody who, for example, is a project manager or a software developer or a procurement person. How do we start teaching them some of these foundational cyber skills? And if we start pushing those skills left, we have less reliance on that specialist workforce. That's the the key principle here, but to actually transfer those skills left or push those skills left, we need to know what those skills are. Again, this is where SFIA is the answer. And that is why in the playbook, the work that I did with the Australian government, we actually liked SFIA because it isn't just cyber skills, it's all this digital skills. And so when we start talking about other technical functions, we can map the cyber skills as well as the skills that they're using in those areas. For the general workforce, however, that just need cyber literacy, that basic knowledge of, hey, this is how I protect myself online. Hey, maybe I shouldn't click on that link. Digicom is the answer. So again, this was covered off yesterday, so I won't labor on it. But as a framework for all citizens, this is good to go, particularly that dimension 4, where we're starting to look at safety. That is the framework that we should be looking at in terms of adjusting the behaviors to raise cyber literacy across the whole organization. Now, professional skills, and I apologize if this isn't the terminology that most people use. This is just what I use. You may call it ways of working, you may call it commercial skills, but again, why I love SFIA is it has all these other skills. And when I think about a graduate that comes straight out of higher education into my workforce, they might be great at the technical skills. So pen testing, digital forensics, whatever their discipline is, they're great at that technical stuff. But a lot of organizations complain about, well, they're not job ready. And so I asked the question, and why aren't they job ready? What are the additional skills? What is the additional learning that we need to provide these individuals? And on the right-hand side, and this is actually some data from within my own organization, I call it the finishing school concept. What are the skills that we want these people to have to be able to actually release them in the wild in front of customers? Being able to go out and deliver a presentation, understanding things like margin leakage and how do we do effort estimates? How do we engage stakeholders? How do we run a project? These are all additional skills which are within SFIA, but quite often we only ever focus on those core technical skills for a lot of these jobs. So it's why I really love SFIA, and if you haven't explored which of these sorts of skills are applicable to your technical people, I'd strongly recommend looking into some of those ones. So now moving into how do we use SFIA to drive learning. So we have that common language. We understand our capability needs. Capability needs dictate what knowledge, skills, and responsibilities people have. Once we identify the skills, we can look at our current state. Do we have the skills? If we don't, that's the gap between where we are and where we want to be. That then dictates the learning plan. And this is another thing I really see as a failing with a lot of people leaders in organizations is people just look at a course and say, yeah, that looks like it's loosely related. Whereas they should be looking at the skills first. So what skills have I got? What skills do I need? Does this course actually cover those skills? And a lot of the good courses out there, a lot of the certifications and accreditations, they actually have done the SFIA mapping, but where they haven't, before evaluating whether a particular investment in learning is good, SFIA is the way to do that. So that's not something you're doing. Also look at going down that path. Now, another potentially new word for a lot of people on the call, the pedagogical approach to learning. So you may have seen pedagogical, you may have seen andragogical, but in very layman's terms, pedagogical is, think of it like classroom students, school kids. Andragogical is adult learners, so they're coming in with a bit of life experience. But for cyber people, we have this thing called pedagogical approach to learning. So it's very individual centered. You don't have somebody in front of you telling you what to do. There's a lot of self-exploration. You're quite often learning things beyond your current role. It might not even be, and when I say beyond your current role, it might not be something to level up. It actually might be something to level sideways. So when I think about a SOC analyst, they will quite often go off and learn digital forensic skills, or they may go off and learn penetration testing skills to understand what does it look like from an adversarial perspective. It's a very process oriented versus content. So again, we're overly represented in the cybersecurity workforce by neurodivergent people. So we don't like sitting there going through slide decks. We don't like self-paced learning. We want to be doing hands-on learning. So it's about the process and hands-on. And we want to be able to work at our own pace. Everybody learns new concepts and applies concepts at different speeds. So the situation where you're in a classroom and everybody's at the same point just doesn't work for a lot of cyber professionals. So just wanted to put this out there as one of the sort of key principles. Continuous learning, things change. Like I said, by the time it's in a textbook, it's out of date. So we need to have that space within our organizations for continuous learning. We learn, we practice, we gain experience, we update that experience and the skills, and we apply it. Now, it's the experience and apply thing that I want to harp on this slide. There's a lot of words on this slide, but experience and apply is the key thing. Organizations, and we need to think about how have we created a space for people to learn these things and to try things. When I think about a SOC analyst, you could be a SOC analyst with 10 years of experience and never had a particular type of incident. So when that particular type of incident occurs, are you prepared for it? Well, you're probably not. So it's incumbent on us to actually create those environments where they can practice all of these things that aren't routine, that gets people out of their comfort zone. Things like cyber ranges, things like going off and doing tabletop exercises. That is the way to experience and apply. Touched on this, but this 70-20-10 model, it's been around for 40 years. A lot of our learning is by doing. It's on the job. It's about designing the work in a way that we learn while we're doing the work. That needs the right support mechanisms in place, things like infrastructure, coaching. You need people leaders who can actually articulate the learning that you need people to do. A lot of it's also social learning, not just within the organization, but going externally as well. So you may have buddies, you may have communities of practice, things like that, but also going outside the organization. A lot of people tend to get siloed and forget that people do things differently in other organizations. So that collaboration is huge for learning. And then that final sort of 10% is the formal interventions. Now, one thing that we looked at when we were doing the playbook, and I mentioned before, there was another working group that was looking at emerging technologies, and they made a list of the top 3 things that they wanted to look at: artificial intelligence, quantum tech, and digital identity. And I looked at it from a workforce perspective, and it was actually Richard Buckland at UNSW in Sydney, which kind of highlighted this to me. It's yes, all of these technologies that we have in front of us today, they're going to have workforce impacts. However, they're today, and it's a 7-year strategy. So going forward into the future, we don't know what technologies are actually coming out there. So rather than focus on the specifics of today, what we actually landed on was, what are the core human-centric competencies? What are the key human traits that no matter what technology comes, no matter what changes in the landscape, we can just deal with it? And so we sort of shortlisted the 8 there: adaptability, resilience, continuous learning, critical thinking, problem solving, emotional intelligence, collaboration, and change management. And I didn't even look at the SFIA generic attributes, but as you can see, quite a lot of those, the wording might be slightly different, but if you read the descriptions, they're almost the same. So as a frameworks, the SFIA generic attributes, we need to be looking at those a lot more, because they're the things that are actually going to future-proof our workforce. And for me as an employer, I'm actually not that concerned about technical skills, because I can train people pretty quickly and easily, but these generic attributes, they're a lot harder to train. I make the joke that there isn't a bachelor of decision making. There isn't a bachelor of creativity. I can't teach that. I can't train it. So getting people in with those sorts of characteristics is how we get our competitive advantage in terms of workforce. Expanding on that one a little bit more. So this was an articulation of what are all of those, what SFIA calls generic attributes, which we're actually going to be looking for in the future. So it was from this report called Building Human Skills for the AI Economy. Yes, there are some things here which are SFIA generic attributes, but if you want to broaden that and actually look at what are the other areas that we need to start preparing our workforce for, this is a good starting point. So some of these things, I don't know, a little bit dubious, like grit. How do we build grit? It's odd. But in terms of what we're looking for in our workforce, in terms of what we need to prepare our workforce for, this is a good framework. And the final bit, so we looked at the workforce architecture, this generalist, the specialist, we looked at learning. This is the final bit. This is the assurance piece. Now, this was just 5 minutes, me thinking about what are all the ways that I can assess whether somebody's actually competent, actually assure our capabilities. And this is all sort of cyber, or most of these are cyber specific ones. So going out and doing things like threat hunting, not only is that a way to learn, it's a way to test an individual's competency, but it's also a way to assure the organization's capability as well. Things like misconfigured servers. These are images that you can download online. They're deliberately misconfigured. Getting an engineer to identify, getting them to troubleshoot what is the vulnerability here. These are good ways to test people for a job interview. It's a good way for people to pick up new skills and test their skills and make sure that they stay up to date with changing technology trends. So happy to share these slides because I know there's a lot of stuff on there. But the key point I'm emphasizing is when we're assessing and assuring our capabilities, specifically in cybersecurity, things like certifications and qualifications, that's not enough. Things like independent audits, pen testing, that once a year snapshot of have we ticked a box, it's not good enough. So we need to start really looking at all of these different areas and options. And this is my last slide. Some of the other sort of random things that we came across when we were pulling the playbook together. When you're building a workforce, when you think about skills, when you're thinking about learning, it's got to align with the strategy. If it doesn't support the business's mission, you're just off doing basket weaving courses. You're just building skills that you don't need. Starting where you are, I actually stole that from the iTool framework. Start where you are. You don't need to go out and go right to the end state. You've got things that you've already done. Iterate it. Small changes are better than building something new, building something big. Move slowly and pilot in small sections. If you are trying to implement SFIA across any part of the life cycle, don't do it across the entire organization. Start with a team, find the champions, find the people that will evangelize it and sell it. Pivot to a skills first or skills portability strategy. So we're going to be talking less about occupations and jobs in the future, and we're going to be talking more at that granular skill level. So get your organizations ready for that now. If you are combining frameworks, for example, ITIL or NIST or DigComp, there is a methodology. You need to assess, choose, combine, operationalize, and improve. Again, this is terminology that comes from ITIL, but we don't implement any of these frameworks in their entirety and verbatim. We adopt and adapt. Think globally, act locally. So for the larger organizations that do operate across jurisdictions, for example, if you're operating in Europe, you need to start thinking about GDPR regulations. you need to have a skills framework. You need to have these processes in place and policies that support across the whole organization. And if you're in a scale up stage, now's the time to think, because it's a lot harder to change once it's built. Don't forget the full spectrum of the capability frameworks, and not just technical skills, those professional skills I was talking about, the ways of working, what we call knowledge. That is all capability as well. Not a lot of that is covered by SFIA, so don't just think about SFIA only, also consider those other dimensions. The hierarchical versus matrix structures. A lot of people in cybersecurity don't want to get promoted. They don't want to become people leaders and have direct reports. They just want to be nerds. They want to move sideways. How is your employee value proposition supporting that sideways movement? How is your employee value proposition supporting, challenging them in different areas, different technical areas? One of the traps I've seen is those workforce architectures where it's a pyramid. We don't want that. Use enabling technologies to accelerate implementation. So your HR systems, your learning management platforms, make sure that they actually support and have the same language. You don't want people jumping between systems, having different taxonomies, having to dig into documents and things like that. Get buy-in and input from the end users. People don't necessarily like to be told what to do by HR and other people. They want to be consulted. We need to go through that co-design process. So get people involved, get them early, and pilot it in small groups. And once you do go out and roll it out more broadly, manage the people side of the change. A lot of people don't like these kinds of changes. So explaining the rationale, the business benefits, how it supports their personal development and growth, that is all critical. Build and iterate over time. Like I mentioned earlier, it is not a set and forget. This stuff needs to change all the time. You need to make sure you have the time invested into making it fit for purpose. Otherwise, you will not have people with the right skills and it will become problematic. Engaging your vendors. So for anybody that is working with tech vendors, so people like Fortinet and Palo Alto, Cisco, all of these vendors, they have courses, they have defined a lot of these roles and pathways. Not many of them, surprisingly, have actually done mapping back to SFIA. It's something I'm talking to a couple of them about, but getting them involved in those discussions around workforce architecture and pathways is quite often an accelerator, so you don't have to invent it yourself. Consider the career changes and internal mobility. So bringing in people from other parts of the business. They already know the business. They already have knowledge of the business. They're really useful. So consider what skills assessment looks like for them, what skills portability looks like for them, and what those pathways look like. Use the right tools for measuring competence and capability. That was the previous slide. I've got a note there about Dunning-Kruger effect. It is highly pronounced in cybersecurity, and quite often people underestimate or overestimate. So make sure that you've considered that. The last one I've already covered, and that is the end of my presentation, and we are at time. Any questions? I'm happy to stay on for a bit if people would like. Grant's question, if full transparency, I do work very closely with Grant and the SFIA team. I think the biggest gap or the biggest barrier to broader adoption is the assessment tools. And I understand why. It's very contextualized, very hard to make something fit for purpose for everybody. But it's easy to use SFIA if we're putting a job ad out. Very harder to use SFIA if we're talking about actually assessing. So we have defined what the work looks like under the different levels of responsibility, but that next step of how do we actually know if somebody can do that, that is the bit that most organizations struggle with. That would be my answer to that one, Grant. If there are any other questions, I've got my details up on the screen. Feel free to send me an email or connect on LinkedIn. and happy to share slides with you all. Otherwise, thank you for your time. Hope you learned something, and safe cybers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jakub. That was awesome.
Yep, great job. Yeah, really good. Are you staying on, Grant?